it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Sir David Higgins and provocateur Alana Newbrook to the stage for a nice fireside chat. So Sir David Higgins is Chair, Gatwick Airport, and the former Chairman of High Speed Rail too. Since 1995, he has been Chief Executive at 4 different large organisations: Lend-Lease, English Partnerships, the Olympic Delivery Authority and Network Rail. In each, he was responsible for projects of national importance in which he demonstrated commercial and technical innovation. He is totally the real deal, and he was knighted in 2011 for services to regeneration. So obviously we were absolutely over the moon to have David formally close the Dialogue's week-long study tour of East London in 2019. And I know that there are a lot of East Londoners that came onto that tour with us. And thank you to Tim Williams and John Burton also for your help with that. And we are equally stoked that he joins us today. Alana Newbrook is Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director at Systra. An engineer for over 20 years, Alana has worked in the transport, defence and energy sectors and has deep expertise in the setup and delivery of major infrastructure projects. Please make them welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and it is an absolute honour to be here with you today, Sir David, but no, you did say I could call you David, but so, look, let's get started. Systra is a French-based company, and we've designed half the world's high-speed rail and metro lines, so we're very interested in all things high-speed, faster rail, and the dialogue's heating up. And when I opened the paper this morning, I see a nice headline saying, "High-speed Sydney to Melbourne rail plan will never work," says infrastructure czar Sir David. Did you want to explain a little bit about this comment and how the West can look to capitalise on faster rail for our local, regional growth?
Sure. So high-speed rail never works financially to build it. It always has to be built for a broader public commercial reason. It'll never recover its capital costs. That's just a grim reality. But what you do hope is that it will cover its operating costs. So Eurostar's 2 hours, it connects 2 cities of 8 million people. It works financially. It's never going to recover the cost of the Channel Tunnel, but it makes a decent profit, and it's privately financed and privately owned. High Speed 2 Phase 1 to Manchester, that covers Manchester, Birmingham, 2 cities of over 3 million each, and London 8 million. So 15 million people directly connected within 1 hour, and 3 major airports. They'll never recover the cost of the 60 or 80 billion pounds, whatever it costs to build it, but it will work financially, and there'll be massive other benefits that go to the economy to do that. So, you know, the rule of thumb is 2 hours. It usually works. People, now Sydney to Melbourne, it's 3.5 hours on high speed. Why would people? And I can't imagine the cost of doing it when you can run a perfectly effective, open competition air system that would well and truly outpace rail.
Mm. But if we talk around, I see in the article as well, you could see some benefits for more localised regional faster rail around, say, Parramatta up to Gosford, or we mentioned the Sunshine Coast or other smaller parts. How do you think the West can capitalise on those sort of opportunities if we're looking at some faster rail?
So I would say, don't say never between Sydney and Melbourne, but if you want to build high-speed rail, build it in and around the suburbs and the approaches to Sydney to get that started. I mean, high speed is classified as something above 140 miles an hour as train, but 140 miles an hour is not bad for a train service to run and give you capacity. But you know, I always marvel over the Gold Coast to Brisbane. I mean, there's a conurbation which has a symbiotic relationship with the CBD in Brisbane. And yet whenever I go up there and stay with my relatives, and I have a meeting in central Brisbane, they say, you better get up at 5 because you've got to get on the 8-lane motorway well before 6, otherwise you'll never make your meeting at 9 o'clock in central Brisbane. And for heaven's sake, don't catch the rail motor, which is effectively what it is. It chugs along all stops up there. And I mean, that should be 20 minutes between Nerang and Central Gold Coast and straight through into Roma Street and into centre of Brisbane. And then that would just transform the way that, and the northern side, all up through Mango Hill, I mean, that's purposely built for high-speed capacity rail to bring in commuters. Why shouldn't someone in Liverpool or Campbelltown expect to be able to live in the CBD? Remember, Sydney's an incredibly concentrated city commercially. If you want a high-paying job, you've got to be in the CBD of Sydney. That's where all the financial services companies are based, or now a bit further down towards Everleigh. You've got to be able to get there. Why shouldn't someone that lives in Richmond or Campbelltown be able to get in there in less than an hour? They should be able to.
Thank you. So besides faster rail, the transformation of the West we've heard about here this morning includes all forms of planes, trains, light rails and automobiles. From your global expertise, what do you think we in the industry here need to consider as we start to transform the West with these multi-modes of transportation?
I suppose the thing I would caution Greater Sydney to think about is try and think what in 100 years' time generations will say is great, this generation did that. I mean, we work on a railway system in the UK that was started 190 years ago, and the West Coast was finished 170 years ago. Bazalgette did the main sewer system that created London's fantastic embankments 160 years ago. The Georgian squares that define all of central London happened 160 years ago, and they stand the test of time. People look at them now and say they were nation building, they were fantastic. Sydney Harbour Bridge was, the contract was let in 1924. It was a PFI. There was a levy put on 5 different boroughs or council areas to tax them to pay for something at the Harbour Bridge. But you look at it. So I would say, as you look at the growth of Western Sydney, think, what are the fundamental things? I look at it and think, you have this extraordinary asset, which is all the vegetation. As I look at it on Google Earth, I think, what an amazing city to have that incredible amount of natural vegetation, which of course I was here in Christmas 19, was really devastated by that effect there. You're going to raise Warragamba. That's a method because of the massive flooding. Again, I was here during the flooding early this year here. You've got some real impacts happening now with climate change, and that must affect your planning approach. You must give the rivers and the areas a chance to grow. Climate change or extreme weather is now here to stay. We need to do climate adaptation, and the issue of more extreme heat is going to affect the fires and the impact of such an incredible asset. Think that through as how you expand and where you put housing policy and infrastructure into these incredibly precious areas.
Okay, thank you. That leads quite nicely to my next question, and then I can see there's a couple coming through here, so I encourage you to do that with the QR codes on your tables. So David, you've had an illustrious and very successful career overseas, but we can be proud to see that you are educated and home is in Sydney, and you've continued to return home over your career. What is it that keeps you returning here, and what are your dreams? I think you iterated a little bit in your earlier question, but what are your dreams for the future of Sydney?
Oh, well, I come back to Sydney because I'm an Australian. So I was born in Queensland, born in Brisbane, and went to school and university and spent much of my life here. And I have a house in Sydney, and I'll never change that. So I'm always interested to contribute. I was interested that Brisbane's got the 2032 games and what they make the most out of that. So Sydney, I mean, I always look at Sydney and say, what are the things that mankind has done to Sydney that are irreplaceable? It's fantastic. I mean, I look at London and think, God gave London an old river that's muddy and pretty ordinary. Frankly, a few humps of hills there, not much else. Nothing really, really good when you think about it. And out of it, humankind created St James Park and Richmond and Hampstead Heath and these extraordinary villages, which is what London is. It's an amazing city where you can walk through it, and each village has its own character and public places, and they haven't destroyed that yet. And I challenge myself, and I challenge Sydney-siders, and I mean, we have the heads, and that's what was naturally created here, and thank goodness enough of that has been protected, and you've got to say the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. But we've got to think, what does this generation leave behind that previous generations left Centennial Park? What will the current generations leave behind that people really value that'll last more than 100 years? And I think that's hard to think about what that is, actually.
There's a question that's come through here, so it's a bit of a counter to your earlier discussion. But so it says, the University of New South Wales Centre for City Futures counters your view, suggesting that value uplift could fund a substantial portion of high-speed rail. What do you think about that?
I'll never pay for all of high-speed rail, that's for sure. But my example was Crossrail. So Crossrail in London, or the Elizabeth line, which is fabulous, it's opened. It obviously distorted value around the stations, and so there's a tax put on those stations to pay for it. Why shouldn't they? Why should people in Newcastle or Birmingham pay for a £25 billion railway all through tax? Some of it's paid for by taxpayers, some of it's paid by farebox, but a big portion is paid by that. Same Thames Tideway, same story. It's a huge tunnel that goes for 60 miles. Again, that's paid for by the people on the Thames catchment that will benefit from a cleaned up Thames. So yeah, I went along Rouse Hill, the North West Rail 3 or 4 years ago. I went with a politician, and it was interesting. We started at the back, and they said, "We see that house there? That sold for $500,000 5 years ago. It's just sold for $10 million because someone's going to put high-rise apartments on it because it's 5 metres from the station." I said, "Did you get any of that?" And they said, "No." As we went the whole way down the line, it took 2 days, there's just these amazing examples of a massive uplift in value. I said, "You know, you created all that, and you're stupid enough not to have collected any of it." So they said, "Would you mind writing me a paper?" I said, "I'll show you what I've done in Milton Keynes. I'll show you our value capture models, which we've implemented in London," sent the papers through. I don't know what happened out of it.
Anyone know? Very good answer. Look, as we look around, we're in the city, Western City here, and we're building a new city, Bradfield, which will be built around the Western Sydney Airport. And Bradfield is being hailed as the first 22nd century city. So what does that mean to you? And do you have any tips as we digitise and upgrade our existing infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great they're building Western Sydney Airport. Long should it have happened many years ago. So I sit on the board of Sydney Airport mascot, so I don't see it as a conflict. London has 6 airports. It has 200 million people a year go through its major airports, let alone Port and Eurostar. So yeah, Sydney needs to be more connected, and I can see both airports working strongly together. I would say it's just really hard to think what's happening. I'll give you some figures that might surprise you. Just before I left London, there was a very credible report that said, even there's massive building going on in the City of London's new 80-storey office tower, just committed to the other day. It said over the next 10 years, there'll be a real loss of value in commercial office space in the City of London by 40%. That's because no one works 5 days a week, full stop. I mean, the City of London is incredibly competitive. So you have the European headquarters of Salesforce, of Bloomberg, of Apple, of Google, of Facebook. You have most of the top tech companies, even with Brexit, base their business there, and yet they expect a 40% reduction. So I was involved with Bluewater. Bluewater cost $600 million when it was built, finished in '99. Within 5 years, it was worth $2.2 billion. Last year, a big stake in Bluewater sold for $600 million. That's what's happened to values in commercial shopping centres across London, certainly across America. Something weird's going to happen in commercial office space in the next 10 years, and that's what this study says. So what are the implications on that, and where are people going to work, and what does it mean for how people... So small cell technology, I advise a company, have done for 5 years. We're putting a huge investment of over £1 billion into London small cell technology to make London the most connected city in the Western world in terms of having a mobile data device and being able to access it anywhere in the city. And another example, when Paris has the opening ceremony for the Olympic Games, it's not going to be in the Stade de France. It's going to be out in the open. It's going to be from Des Invalides. There's a huge corridor that goes from there right through under the Eiffel Tower. 2 million people are going to stand there and pay nothing and watch the opening ceremony in Paris. It's going to be an amazing spectacle. It will be paid for by digital revenue of people that are going to want branding and all that will come with that. What's that mean for venues in future and how people participate in sport? So I just think there's a lot of things happening out there which is going to redefine public spaces and why people want to live and work in cities. And it's all about quality of life, quality of spaces we build.
fascinating to hear too that where the pace of technology is going. Look, we know out here in Western Sydney, it has the highest concentration of PhDs. We did mention that yesterday. It sounds like, for young people here in the room, what sort of skills should we be looking to upskill in, or what do you think is going to be critical to meet these challenges of the future and, with the skills that we might need to be able to adapt?
Well, for 4 years I chaired a strategy committee. I was asked to by the Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor of Sydney University. I stepped down from when I got off the board of CommBank. But they said to me, what should we focus on in Western Sydney? And I said, if you were looking at new industries for Australia and for Sydney to focus on, what would you look on? And I said, I would guess I'd start with healthcare. No, it's not just healthcare services, it's healthcare analytics, data analytics, massive area of Palantir and all these companies now investing in it, and DeepMind, all these companies at Google putting a lot of effort into that. And so the other one I'd focus on is cyber, because that's a huge area going in not in companies but in defence. And I knew that stat about the PhDs. I'd done that research on that. So I said, you should focus on your university and you should expand it in Western Sydney. And what's happened at Stratford on the Olympic site there, University College London built a massive big technology teaching centre in Stratford itself, huge investment of data analytics and that. And my advice is, so I worked with them bidding for the land adjacent to Westmead Hospital so that Sydney University can build a proper independent standalone campus out in Western Sydney that complements all the work it did in establishing Westmead many, many years ago. So what areas to look at? Healthcare is massive. Think of the Asian market. Think of the services that Australia could provide to Asian market and healthcare. Look at the whole issue of what data analytics does. It works out what's the most cost-effective and effective way to use treatments as well as lifestyle as well as drugs in terms of treating people's illnesses, right through to cyber, a massive sector coming up in terms of cyber, both militarily and also company-wise. And Australia must have those technical skills to service that. And you've got the Asian market on the doorstep.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Look, maybe we'll finish off with a last question. I'm obviously doing such a good job because there's no other questions coming through. But look, in terms of maybe a selfish question from me here, looking at your career, and I see you're a fellow alumni of Sydney University. Some of us here in our early or mid-careers like to think we're still going to be around working in this industry for 10, 20, 30 years to come. Any tips about how you've gone about your career or words of wisdom that you might be able to give some of us in the room?
Change jobs all the time. I've worked for 16 different companies. I currently work for 7 companies at the moment. Change jobs, it changes your mind. I do a lot of recruitment and a lot of interviews people, and I look at these people who work at the same company for 35 years and say, move on. We have to find someone else. And then my second thing is take a risk. Take a big risk. You jump into a new career, you have no idea what's going on. Take a salary cut, do something entirely differently. Nowadays, people look for people that take risks, that are different, that think differently, that they write the usual CV. You never read that. You read, they do rock climbing, that's interesting. Or they work for a charity in Africa. I'll interview that person. So just do something different.
That's fabulous advice. Well, we've got a minute to spare, but I know that the program is over time anyway. So unless you've got any final words of closing, it's been an absolute honour, and this is one of my career highlights interviewing you. So thank you for the pleasure. Sure.